Welcome to Beyond Stereo, the Dolby Atmos podcast. I'm Dan Bucknell, and here we talk about the world of immersive technologies aimed at creating a more meaningful and emotional experience for music, film, and just about everything else. Joining us today, we've got Andrew Osano, all the way from Michigan. Welcome, mate. How you going?
Yeah, thank you. It's going all right. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Very excited to have you on. Tell everyone a little bit about what you do and your experiences and exactly what a day is like for you.
So I am a film composer and orchestrator. I do film, video game, television, whatever media is involved. And a lot of my work is orchestration. So I'm working with other composers, helping them get the most out of the orchestra when they're recording, giving them ideas for arrangements and things like that. And then I also do some composing as well on my own.
That's awesome. Okay. When you're working with other people like that, do you tend to be, the one conducting, or are you on the side with working with the musicians, or what does that sort of look like?
So I am not a conductor. I want to make that clear. Like everybody asks me that. No, I will leave that to professional conductors. What I do is oftentimes composers will write in their DAW, so the digital audio workstation, and so that gives a digital file, and they make a mock-up. And when I take their mock-up and prepare the score, the sheet music for it, to make sure everything is balanced when we sit it in front of players, give ideas for maybe some doublings. So like if you have a melody that's happening in the French horn, for instance, I might suggest maybe add the violas in there as well to help support it. Or if they have written just, strings and brass, sometimes they'll ask me to write some woodwind parts in there because we're going to be recording woodwinds as well, and they just want to have a fuller orchestration. So it really depends on what composer I'm working with, as to how much I do, how much creative control I have. Some people have me like add a counter melody or something. So it just depends on who I'm working with.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when you're doing that, just a couple more questions about it. I'd love to just pick your brain here. Because I haven't really had much experience with that side of things. I'm mainly mixing. But so when you're working with people like that, do you sort of tend to use the same orchestras a lot, or is it, different every time? What's that like?
Yeah, so we tend to use mostly the same. There are like a small a group of orchestras that we'll usually pick from it, and it depends on price and availability, like when we can get the session, and sometimes budgets constrained, we have to go with the cheaper orchestra, and so that's kind of how we make our choices. And a lot of times these orchestras are actually in Eastern Europe. That's where we do a lot of the recording, and sometimes we also do record soloists. So I've had to make parts for Chinese instruments, and then they'll have people in China record remotely record the parts. So yeah, it varies, but we have pretty much a small range of orchestras that we pick from.
That sounds really exciting. So you work with a lot of different people. Awesome. I guess it keeps it fresh. So I just wanted to talk about something here. Now, the main purpose of the podcast is to sort of bring to light the whole idea of immersion, and even this podcast is called the Dolby Atmos podcast, Beyond Stereo. However, it's not just about that, and I feel like especially in your world, but in kind of all areas of any art form, any media, immersion is something that probably matters beyond almost everything else, where the audience is taken to another place, and they forget they're watching a movie or playing a game, and they're just totally immersed in whatever they're doing. And that's our job as the technical crew and creatives, to try and give them that experience. What's your approach to doing that when you're writing music? What's the process behind trying to achieve that?
Absolutely. So in any media, there is a suspension of disbelief that the audience is required to have. Because how often do you walk around just your town and you have an orchestra, following you and playing along with everything that you do, kind of
That'd be awesome, though.
Commenting on all of your things you're doing. So there is a certain level of suspension of disbelief that you as a composer have to um, give that to the audience. Where yes, there is this orchestra playing and they shouldn't be, but I am still in the story and it's actually enhancing what I'm feeling. So you kind of you help the story by not necessarily guiding the audience, but you can, to a certain point, manipulate how the audience feels about a certain scene. And that's where you're working with the directors to say, these are the images and the music I want to help either enhance or in some cases be juxtaposed against what you're seeing to maybe give a subtext to what's happening. And as a composer, you want to create a world because you look at some of the great film scores of all time, like Star Wars or the Lord of the Rings. There's a certain there's a sound of each of those scores where you can pick any cue out and it feels like the world of Middle Earth or a galaxy long, long ago and far away. And so you as a composer have to develop.
Very iconic.
Yes, you have to develop that sound. Like, what is this going to sound like? Um, and like even going into like more modern scores, you have like Dune is a completely immersive sound. Like it's not necessarily as many melodies, but there is a certain amount of sound design or textures that are evocative of this world. So one of my favorite examples from a modern score is from The Dark Knight. It's the Joker theme. It's not necessarily a melody, but it's this sound. It's a mixture of tones that whenever you hear that, there's this sense of unease. It's like visceral, and you feel that the Joker is somewhere, and that really brings you in to the film. Like you're feeling what the other characters are feeling by just having the sound that denotes this character and the chaos that he brings to that world, and now you're part of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's almost, subliminal as well. Like it's sort of, it doesn't have to necessarily draw, dramatic attention to it itself as well.
Exactly.
There's plenty of times, I mean, I can think of so many movies, like let's go back to Star Wars. There's the emotion behind it, I suppose. We were talking before about, what a director might, have as intentions for how it's supposed to feel. And that is where you bring in, an emotion to work from. And if you feel that while you're experiencing this or watching this, then that's kind of it. And then, sometimes people, I think, don't realize how involved that can get. Even when I'm mixing things or, doing sound design in other areas, that idea of a soundscape that is not to be noticed but felt is a make or break for the scene, those kind of things. And it's almost like you take it out and you notice, but when it's in there, you may not even be able to pick what it is about the scene that makes you feel that way. And sometimes the score can be really, helpful to do that. And I've seen plenty of awesome examples of that. But yeah, the sound designer, Ben Burt, for Star Wars, like he was always looking for, very unique sounds that just sound otherworldly, or maybe he'd slow something down or reverse it, just to make it feel completely just different than anything you've ever heard. And just those things, even if they weren't dramatic sounds that, you're really listening for, it's just part of the soundscape or the ambiences or part of the score as well. And those things
absolutely
bring it to, another galaxy. Yeah. And it's sort of like underneath, it doesn't have to be really, really obvious.
And going to the sound design, there's a character to sounds that people don't realize. Like there are thousands of door creaks, and you may have to search through an entire library of door creaks to find the one that has the character that you're looking for that particular door. A wooden door is going to creak differently from a metal door, from all these different elements. And and that can also be influenced by the scene. Like, is it something that you want subtle? Like, or is it just like you're in a dramatic scene, you just want to make the world feel real? Or is a horror film where you want to have something that is going to be like an imminent danger when you open this door? So this creak has to have a more character to it. So like there's so much about sound design and music that takes creativity and care and thought. and also while working within a framework. So like if you've set out a certain soundscape for a film, uh, you have to tell this emotion, but you're limited to what you've set out for this world. So like if I have a scene that, like, there's someone crying, um, and I want to have something emotional, what can I use out of my tool bag that is for this particular film, that in that sound world that I've created, that will be useful for it. Like I'm not going to bring out some completely random instrument out of nowhere, because it's going to feel out of place, and it's going to actually take the audience out of the film.
Yes, yeah, totally. And I think that is very interesting to, talk about where we have to build something from scratch completely, like it doesn't exist anywhere else. And it's almost like creating those limitations helps, to sort of define what it is. Because without that, it's kind of free for all, and then nothing makes sense if it's all random like that. It really does have to have a sound, just committed to that is what this is, and I think that's again back to Star Wars. They do that perfectly, and that's what makes them iconic, because it's really just it's following its own rules, but I mean, in another way, it is following those rules very well, even if it's making up its own rules as well. So I feel like that's a very, very cool thing right there.
I've actually had an experience where this wasn't the case, and it took me out.
Interesting.
I remember there was a song in it's a musical film, and the song thing goes on. It's a great song, and then the final chord uses a tonality that is completely foreign to anything that was in the song prior. And I was like, "Where'd that come from? Why was that there? Like that doesn't have anything to do with any of the structure that you set up." And it felt, out of place and wrong, at least to me. So
Yeah,
like
right.
having that kind of thought and care of like, I've created something, I'm going to stick to it. How can I get the same effect while using what I've already built?
Yes, no, I can definitely see how that would impact it. Although it just sort of gave me another thought. You could use that sort of phenomena where it is out of place and it is dramatically different, that it throws you off, and you could totally use that as a tool as well if that
Absolutely,
is used
absolutely.
like intentionally, and that's quite
Unsettling.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It just gives you a feeling of like, what is this? So I've got a question here, which is quite an interesting one. So we've talked about, already, like just different instruments that, can be used to create maybe a subtle effect, but then, around the immersion of bringing an audience in so they forget about the fact that they're watching something, right? Just removing the technology completely. Are there any particular elements or maybe instruments, mixing techniques even, that you've found just in your travels that just do that particularly
Kind of
well?
bring the audience in. It varies from what we're working on. Um, so I had to write a tango for something, and so in order
That
to
sounds fun.
have that kind of argent, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like to bring it into the world, there are particular sounds that are associated with this style of music. So you have accordions, you have all these different things that kind of bring the world, and it would feel less authentic, or not necessarily less authentic because it's not required, but for an audience that is not necessarily steeped in that tradition, there is this expectation of like, this is what I know about tango music, and this is what I'm expecting to hear. And so you bring in that sound. And in the films, this is a case where we'll sometimes use instruments that are maybe not native to the location that this world is set, but because the audience has this expectation, we still use it. So like the duduk is an instrument. It originates in Armenia.
And
Um,
just for those who don't know, could you maybe like explain what that looks and sounds like?
yeah, so it's similar to um, an oboe. So it's got two. It's a double reed. So there's like these thin slices of wood that vibrate against each other. but it's a much wider reed than the oboe would have. And it's a wind instrument. It's kind of short. And it's that kind of iconic Middle Eastern sound. And so like you'll hear it in like um, films that are set in Arabia, the Middle East, but the instrument itself isn't native to there. But there's this expectation from the audience that we've built over the decades of filmmaking that this is the sound of this world, even though it may not be in the real world. It still helps bring you in as because you're building on not only what you've created for this particular film, but you're also building on all the films that have come before and what the expectations are for these sounds.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. The audience brings their own sort of context to watching the film too, so it has to make sense for what they're expecting. Like you said, I think that's a really awesome one actually, because like I wouldn't have even thought that instrument was not from there because it is an iconically it's used so often for that. And I know the sound that you're talking about is sort of like a drone, with a bit of a uh, it's got a bit of a wobble to it. Is that what you're talking about? Like
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
sound?
And actually, and so speaking of that instrument in particular, that was actually used in another context in the Chronicles of Narnia. So the Narnia lullaby that Mr. Tumnus plays,
Yes.
it's actually two dudukes being played simultaneously. That's the sound that I'm talking about.
Wow, and that's got a very haunting quality to it, especially as it's
Yes.
used in that scene. That's a really
Yeah.
really good one.
And what makes it feel appropriate in that particular scene is not just because of the sound. There's also the melody used has it doesn't have the kind of stereotypical Middle Eastern sound. He gave it a more folksy tune to it. So like it's a juxtaposition of this instrument that is associated with the Middle East, but because you use a different tonality with it, you've developed this kind of sound of folk. You've created something completely new that is neither completely Earth folk and not Middle Eastern. This is something brand. It's the world of Narnia. So it create like those creative solutions to creating something new from what already exists.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love all of those things. Pretty much everything you just said. So inspiring to me, like that you can create something new from something using the expectations of what the audience knows something to be, but then taking it just to another level with new context as well, and then you've just been recreating something essentially, but it with a new flair, and that is now something completely new, which is perfect for that scene. Like I can't imagine
Absolutely.
any other song with any other instrument that would have worked as well as that. Like that is so good. I think that what this bridges into a new topic here, but with the visuals on screen to that too, I think the synergy between what you're seeing on screen with the sound is sort of a beautiful thing in itself, and that's an art form. However, I was going to ask before about, is there some moment that you can think of, maybe in a film you've seen or something you've worked on, that the sound or the score particularly has helped or been necessary to elevate the story in ways that the visuals just couldn't do by themselves?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of times where it's it's actually an interesting kind of way that you can use music in a film is to use it heavily and then take it away.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, and that makes the emptiness feel that much more effective and potent. So like say you have a big battle scene and the music builds up to this great crescendo, and then right at the peak all the music drops out and you just have the sound of the battle. It makes those battle sounds stand out that much more. And that emptiness, yeah, that emptiness is actually gives that more impact.
Yeah, 100%
Um,
agree. I like to use the sound of silence. I mean, that doesn't really exist in the real world, but using that in a film can be chilling and just really effective. I think changing the mood dramatically like that is quite amazing. And There's movies like A Quiet Place, things like that, that use
Mm-hmm.
silence extremely well.
Yes.
But I mean, things like that, yeah, sometimes it's a lack of something that is right for a scene with music or anything else.
Yeah, if you have like a character that is, throughout the entire film, they have a great life, and you accompany it with music, and then all of a sudden a tragedy happened, and they feel alone. So now the lack of music kind of scores the loneliness. So you're using silence as a tool to tell the story of loneliness because there's this like isolation that is now there. They were accompanied by this whole orchestra for the entire film, and now they're silent. So that makes that loneliness feel that much more intense.
Oh, definitely. And I think zoning into the perspective of that person really makes you, feel for
Absolutely.
them even
And it
more.
brings you in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really good use of that, I mean, in a different sort of scenario, but the sound in the new Batman film, have you seen that one?
Yes, I have.
So that one is a pretty big one for me. I think the use of a few people have told me about it as well, and all just freaking out about it. The use of rain obviously is quite heavy in that film. However, I think as the character goes through things or is focusing on different parts of like what's happening in the story as it moves forward, the use of sound design, it sort of fluctuates up and down to match what he's looking at. So he's outside, there's rain everywhere, and you can hear that full pelt, and it's just what it is. And then something might happen that pulls his attention, and then as he focuses in on it, the rain just goes lower and lower until finally it's almost gone, and he's still there in the rain, but it's now the perspective has changed. Like it's like what he's focusing on, and we're using sound to push the audience towards what's important in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also what he's zoning in on, and he's like completely forgetting or zoning out of the surroundings that don't matter.
Well, and that happens in real life.
It does, exactly.
That happens. Yeah. So like if you become hyper focused, you tend to like you'll actually stop hearing things. Your brain will filter out the noise because it wants to focus and it needs to use all those brain resources to focus in on these things. So it will filter out those kinds of sound. And you actually have to consciously think about them to say, oh yeah, it's raining. I hear the rain. But because he was hyper focused, and that brings the audience in, like I'm feeling what the character is feeling.
I love that. I really think it's amazing when people use sound that way. It's really inspiring. So I'm just gonna pivot now.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, Dolby Atmos is a massive part of my life, my work life, and what I do. Pretty much everyone who knows me knows that I'm a nut for it. And I think the reason is not necessarily the reason people might assume. So I just want to talk about that for a second, and then I want to ask you about some of the things that might relate to that, whether or not you have used it before specifically. So in the work that I do, most of the things I'm working on, a lot of short films and corporate things, but feature films definitely as well. Pretty much everything I work on tends to be Dolby Atmos now, and I want to talk about why that is, and the cool thing about that is just we're using coordinates now to position a sound in a three-dimensional space. But the cool thing about it is as well that it actually scales down and creates a better workflow for creating deliverables for lower formats as well. So what that means is even if you're making a 5.1 movie, or if you're using stereo, or if a 7.1 or anything, if you build the initial project in Dolby Atmos, then pretty much you get every single other format as well. So it's kind of an easy way to just get all of those things with one mix rather than doing 5 separate ones. So while it's super cool to have things flying over your head and moving all around you and stuff like that, which is obviously, kind of one of the selling points that people talk about, it's not always actually necessary or used for that. It's actually just a better workflow, like I said. And, that's why I'm using it indefinitely for every project, even if the deliverable is lower than Atmos. So I think we're starting to see a rise now for those reasons. The real thing that I love about it is that it actually sort of removes the technology and is aimed directly at, bringing the audience into the story in the best ways. And I think that's the most powerful thing. That's the reason we make films, is to do that. That's my experience anyway. So with that, have you had much to do with Dolby Atmos? And if not, what might be some of the ways that you deliver audio for a score for someone to mix? Let's start there.
So I've not actually had the opportunity to use Dolby Atmos in what I do, but I can definitely see how it can be useful. Um, just kind of going back to the advent of film, I think the whole reason we have this medium is to immerse the audience, and we've developed incrementally to get closer and closer to that peak ideal. Before we had moving pictures because they only had still pictures, and then after they had moving pictures, they were able to incorporate sound, so they had talkies, and so they brought them even more into the story. I remember the famous story of the train scene that in the early 1900s, and people were freaking out because they thought the train was actually going to come hit them. So that this kind of bringing them into this world incrementally. So we like,
And
so
that
then
was all in mono.
yeah, we have sound, and then we get color in film, so that makes it even more like real life. And so like these incremental movements to like just immerse the audience in. Now we're here where we can actually sit the audience in this world with the sounds moving around them is incredible. Like
It's
it's
a
what
whole nother level, isn't it?
yeah, we've been working toward this for 100 years. And for me musically, um, I feel like so a lot of in modern scoring, there are also sound design elements, and there could be some really interesting implications for the scoring process where you can use these sound design elements, move them around the field to give that sense of a visceral connection to the world you're in through the music/sound design. And that could be a really interesting way to use it.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's a really good short film from Dolby as part of an exhibition to promote the technology. I think it came out maybe in 2017. It's a movie called Escape, with a song titled Magic Me, performed and written by Imogen Heap, and who's an incredible artist who also really loves exploring new technologies.
Yep.
And this film, Escape, just blew me away with how the sound design and the music just completely swept you up. You didn't really know which was which. And it was just flawlessly executed by both members. The sound designer on the film was a guy called Nick Ryan. And there was plenty of other amazing, talented artists who also worked on that, doing the mixing and things as well for the Dolby Atmos. But yeah, it perfectly does what you just said, like where sound design and score just meet perfectly in that. And Atmos, I think you couldn't have done that as well without Atmos because of how it's used and where things are placed. So for anyone listening, go and check out Escape on Dolby's YouTube channel. It's incredible. That actually brings me to something else. You had a song that you were writing and recording called the Sylvan Sprite, which was incredible. I think, yeah, you were showing me some stuff. We were talking a little while ago about this. And I was like, I have to mix that in Atmos. I pretty much convinced you to give me the stems. And that was so fun. That was one of the more earlier mixes I did in the format. But I think that came out awesome, and I still use it when I go to different theaters. I'll play that so that I can like get an idea for how it sounds, because I think that mix stood out for me, and the song is just such a awesomely dynamic, beautiful. It sort of sounds like a Disney, epic sort of score. I love it. That's the best.
Thanks. That's what I was going for.
Yeah, well, you nailed it. And with that, yeah, I think that was perfect for Atmos to shine as well, because there's so many little moving parts, and it's so dynamic, and it's so beautiful. That like is where this immersive quality shines the best, I think, when it's not all about it being super loud and in your face and dramatic and or literal. while you certainly can use it in many different ways, it's sometimes the small things, and it's the, the little flutters and the birds, above you, and it's there's little pieces of this puzzle that bring you back to an image in your mind. And if you can see that actually on screen as well, it's like perfectly fully realized. So, I mean,
Mhm.
I want to talk about that score that you wrote and that I mixed for that. What did you end up thinking of it? And yeah, what was your experience listening?
Yeah, well, I mean, that actually reminds me of a video I saw of an orchestra where they were all standing and walking around the stage, and that kind of is what the experience I had listening to it. It was like the the oboist was moving, walking around the stage, and you can feel them, going into these different places. And I feel like that was like, it was a really cool experience for me to like to hear these kind of things happening. And I think that, like you mentioned, this piece was kind of prime for it because there were a lot of not only moving parts, but the elements moved from different parts of the orchestra. So that gave opportunities to like literally bounce the melody around the room and around from player to player.
And it's
Um,
not always about that even. Like, so I mean, a lot of songs that are mixed in Atmos or even scores, you know, can totally sound just as immersive in a static position, and that still sounds amazing. But this particular song, I feel like it really did shine with the movement and the scale that Dolby Atmos enables you to explore. So yeah, it did work for this one. Anyway, going back to what you were saying about the sort of evolution of films from the beginning all the way to now.
yeah. So I think the kind of the leap forward that we had going from mono to stereo in film and audio um, is now exponential. Has grown exponentially with the advent of Atmos because now we not only have just the two sides. We can, like you said, mentioned like birds flying over your head. Like when you said that, I had the image of hearing birds like behind me slowly flying over and then seeing them on screen as they came over. Like that would bring me in the world. That I would feel like the next step would be like having the having them pipe in wind for the fluttering of the wings. So I feel that like it was almost like that. But you at that point you don't really need it because you are so invested that you almost this the sensation is almost implied. So you apply that you're in your head.
Yes, I agree completely. It's like your brain takes it to the next place,
Yeah.
evolution of what you had or heard, and then your brain fills in the blanks. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Um, just back to Sylvan Sprite. I would just want to play a little bit of it.
Oh yeah,
I've got
sure.
the binaural version as well, so I'll put that into this.
Okay, yeah, that was actually going to be my question about listening to things that were mixed in Atmos on different platforms.
Yes.
Like I'm sure I'm not getting the full effect of it listening out just on my like earbuds. So like that maybe you can talk a little bit about the experience moving from headphones into being actually placed in a room with the setup that is designed for what you've mixed.
Yeah, definitely.
And now I'm asking the questions.
Oh yeah, no, I love that. Um, yeah, that's an awesome one because I think the whole binaural thing it's kind of misunderstood somewhat. I think a lot of people agree it's not as far along as I suppose we would have hoped, compared to on speakers where you've got 12 or more speakers giving you a really accurate version of this thing. The fold down to stereo or to binaural, um, yeah, it can be limiting, I suppose, when you compare those things. But it's not necessarily supposed to be compared, and I think that's maybe the mistake people make. The Dolby Atmos deliverable gives you a way to listen to it with whatever you have, and that's the point of it being sort of scalable. So, in fact, the entire point of Dolby Atmos itself is for that reason. So that's what binaural is for. And yeah, an interesting thing actually, people talk about. We've always just had stereo, and 5.1 didn't quite work for music. Say, it just was too hard for people to hear it like that because nobody had those systems. And essentially, Dolby Atmos fixes that problem of giving an opportunity for people to hear a more immersive sounding mix, but on headphones, and that's again what it's for. And just quickly, how that works, it's sort of emulating how our ears work, where we're hearing a single source of sound from any direction, and using both ears, where the sound hits both ears at different times, we can distinguish where something's coming from by the delay in the further ear. And that's kind of how it works. So it sort of uses that idea to replicate the sense of direction in headphones. That's why it doesn't work on speakers as well, because that's already happening in real life. We can hear both sides from both ears at different times. Therefore, the Dolby Atmos mix applied to that way of listening is kind of not isolated for the single ear. So with headphones, we do have that isolation, and so we can more accurately add that effect within the Dolby Atmos mix and give you the sense of surround. So that's what it's sort of all about.
Yeah, I kind of equate that to 3D glasses for your ears.
That's a really good way to put it. Yep, I think so too. So it's an illusion essentially that allows you to experience something like Dolby Atmos if you don't have access to the full array of speakers. But yeah, so let's play this song. I've got it up here now, and this will be the binaural version of the Sylvan Sprite mixed in Dolby Atmos. So if you don't have your headphones on already, now might be a great time to chuck those on so you get the best experience. Here it is, the Sylvan Sprite. So that was the Sylvan Sprite. I love hearing that. Every single time I hear it, I get chills again. It's just a beautiful piece of music, man. Well done. I was going to say as well what we did. When we initially mixed this and we're working on it together, I think I maybe sent you one revision. It was like a pretty quick thing, and I just really wanted to play with it and get it back to you, and that was kind of it. Move on to the next thing, but for both of us. But I'm pretty impressed still and proud of that mix. And there's still some things that I might do differently now. But for one of my first Atmos mixes, I was like, it was really a big learning curve, and it was just so fun. It was so fun. We didn't really release it, but I know you posted some stuff on Instagram, and it's on my website. But yeah, you posted a reel.
And the reel had like videos. They had video of the like an animation of the items moving, correct? Because I think that'd be really interesting, like being able to visually see.
Oh yeah, what that is, that was essentially just a screen grab of the Dolby Atmos renderer, playing back the ADM. So that's like sort of the master file of the Dolby Atmos mix recorded onto the renderer. So when I was doing that, I had it playing in binaural and had the video synced, so you can see exactly where all the instruments are actually moving, and it's a three-dimensional sort of cube-looking representation. This software that shows you where you're putting sounds, and it's quite cool to see what it's actually doing as you're hearing it. I will say it's better on speakers than the binaural. However, I think the binaural still does something, something cool. I guess at the end of the day, it's really more about how it sounds in context with what you're doing. Does it convey the emotion you were going for? That's the main thing that we should be really caring about.
Yeah, I think that's the point of what we do in film or video games is, does it work in context? Is this telling the story in an effective way, in a way that's going to resonate with the audience and bring them in?
Exactly. I think that's the biggest, goal we always have. So I've got another question here for you.
Yeah.
Are there any technical challenges or limitations you've encountered using basically any format? I know you haven't done much work in Dolby Atmos per se, but like, for example, if you have been creating a score for a film or a project that is going to be mixed in maybe Atmos, maybe 5.1 or something else, any technical things that might have come up, what is your deliverable process for things like that?
Yeah, so I try to do as much as I can on my own, but I am not a mixer. This is not the skill set I have been gifted with. I I I try to give them whatever they ask for. For some, it's just just give them stems and they'll mix it from there. Similar to how I gave you the stem from the recording session, and then let them do what they do.
Is it typically like stems, like groups from your session, or is it a full multi-track? Like, what do you mix?
Yeah, it's stemmed from so it's stemmed from the session. I will try to do a bit of a premix, but oftentimes someone can mix it better than I can.
Particularly if it's in surround as well. It's like it's all going to change anyway, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like when I'm with a director who says, okay, so I need to turn down one instrument, and if I don't have the stems, it's got to come down one way or another. And that just means the entire mix is going to come down. So then the composer will be unhappy with me. But that's what the director wanted. And eventually, ultimately that's the decision we go with is what the director wanted. A few engineers I've spoken to have all said the same thing about this as well. And having the stems, I think, is really important to make the right decision, not just be forced into a limitation. That's awesome to know. I think particularly working with films, the stems broken out as much as possible, but probably into groups of things is how I prefer to work.
Yeah.
Mainly just so I can keep what you've already done. With your premix, what are some of the things that you will be throwing on there?
Well, and that's you mentioned something that kind of brought me to one of the limitations. Sometimes money is a constraint, and also performance. So I am of the belief that you will get a better performance with everybody in the room at the same
Oh
time.
yeah.
Which limits your options for stimming, because you're going to have obviously bleed from microphones, and so uh, I and like sometimes you don't have the money to do multiple sessions because you have to pay for the engineers, the space for that extra time. Like, so if you're doing a 3-hour session of strings and you're doing another 3-hour session with brass, it'd be much cheaper just to do all 3 hours in one go.
Yes.
And so you're saving money on one side of it, but then you're making life more difficult for the mix engineer, because then they have to, if you want to take out the horns in this cue, you're out of luck because the horns are in there and they're going to bleed into everybody's microphone.
Yeah, that is definitely a problem sometimes. What would be maybe a best of both worlds then for you? What's like the most ideal way to work that sort of maybe is a compromise? Maybe it's not a compromise, but maybe it's just the best of both worlds. Yeah. What would you say is the most ideal way to work in general?
I would maybe kind of plan on kind of eventualities where, okay, I have this cue. I'm gonna record it as it's written, And then for one of the takes, I'm going to have the horn sit out. Let me just have a pass of just the strings going. That way we can have the option. Hey, we don't like the horns. We can, take this version of maybe just this section. So we don't have to like record the entire cue over again. But I have a cue, a recording or a take of this session or this section of the piece without a certain thing. Or because I do that when I'm orchestrating as well. I give the composers options. I will cue in certain instruments. Say maybe give this to an English horn, just as an idea, or double, and you can use it or you cannot use it. We can get a take with it. That way you can have the option later.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's really the key thing there. That just particularly for any like new filmmakers or creatives that are getting into this stuff for the first time. Having a solid plan, because if you're sort of leaving it to chance, then you really are limited.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things like I wish I knew more about, particularly in this process, is kind of the job of a music editor. I wish I could do it because they can do incredible things. I've worked with a composer. He's got a really great music editor, and what he can do with just, especially when we're recording, strings separate from woodwind, separate from brass, the music editor can score another scene using what we've recorded, using elements from a bunch of different cues, using these different elements to create a completely new cue based on what's already been recorded, which I am
it's so fun.
Amazed by. Yeah.
It's actually quite amazing how well that can work, because it's not what you're expecting. I think it's I'm not really a music editor in general, but I've definitely done elements of that. And there's a film I'm actually working on right now that we're nearly finished. We've got maybe a couple more days to go before we lock down. And this is a Dolby Atmos feature. And yeah, basically I've ended up having to go through the entire score and sound design and everything. And we've reworked a couple of little things, and then we're like, you know what? This scene is missing something. Like, we've got a motif from this idea, and maybe we should like repurpose this, or maybe, what, like the first two bars and then the second two bars, let's swap those and then put it into a new scene with a totally different context. And it just works sometimes. Sometimes it's garbage, but most of the time it's like, wow, that's a totally different feeling now. And it wasn't on purpose. It was just totally, we tried it and hey, that really works. And then you kind of shape it a bit to make it work. But those kind of things are really like magical. The director I was working with, his name is Luke. He's going to be coming on to the podcast very soon as well.
Nice.
Because that was something we did quite a few times. And there was a bit of a magical thing that happened where we'd go, hey, that was totally by accident, but oh my goodness, wow. Now it's just got an extra thing. Have you had times like that in the studio as well? Or just...
Well, yeah. So that's the great thing about this field. It's so collaborative.
Yes.
Especially because, like, as a composer, I'm often alone in my composing room like that. Like, we're often very solitary. It's a very solitary profession.
Yes, I can relate.
But having those moments, those moments of collaboration where someone can see something from a different perspective. I remember working on a film, an animated film, and I wrote a cue, and I ended up so I sent it, and that was that. Then I watched the film just to see how everything came out, and my music stopped early. I was like, oh, I like the part that came next. I bummed that they cut it, but then I kept watching the movie, and then that part they put in a completely other scene, and it worked. Like that. That was incredible to me. It's like, oh, okay, that's not where I intended it, but it works really well. Like it, and I wouldn't have thought to put it there.
Yeah, I love it when that happens, where it's sort of not what was on script, or something happens and it's just like, oh wow, that we have to keep that, and it just becomes part of it, and no one would ever know that it's not meant to be there. But if it's good, it's good. There's something to be said here though about having a good plan. Still, I think it's very important not to wing it.
Absolutely. Time is money.
Exactly. But at the same time, those little magical things that happen just that you weren't expecting, I think that's like the little icing. And those probably matter infinitely more to capture the idea when you just go, this group of people came together with something, and each of their ideas was slightly different, all with different contexts, bringing their own perspectives to the project, and that's what makes a film even
Yeah.
happen. No one can do it by themselves. It is very much a collaborative thing, and then that magic happens. When you do it in the right way. It's really cool.
Yeah, because so often we're too close to what we're working with,
Yes.
and we need that outside perspective for perspective.
It can hold us back. I think in general, a lot of creatives maybe have that self-growth thing, and we're all at different stages of that, and it's not a bad thing. But I think letting go of something and just going, you know what, I'm going to bring my best ideas to a project, and that's my job. And then the next person can take those and take them to the next level, use them how they want, and that's their job. And then they essentially use their best ideas with your best ideas, and that's the collaboration there. And you may not even have met this person, or the person for example on the screen acting, doing the part. I might not even ever meet until the premiere, and I'm mixing them, and we both sort of still working together in that sense.
Yeah. So like you were hired for a reason, but so was everybody else on the project. So being able to relinquish that trust into each person in the project, that they have the best in mind for that project. And like it's hard because there's a certain level of ego that comes with creatives. I thought from it myself, it's a kind of a double edged thing, or like a so you go back between crippling self doubt and massive ego, and there's nothing in between. It's either those two, but like trusting other people, that other people have the best intentions for the project, and they may be more knowledgeable on a certain field than you. So like I am not a mixer, so I have my ideas of what I want it to sound like, but I'm going to trust someone who has dedicated their life to doing this thing. And like you could do it much better than I can. You can hear things that I wouldn't expect to hear, and if I step back and then listen to it with kind of open ears, or objective ears, I will hear that it's much better than what I initially intended, because you've got your experiences that you're pulling from.
I think that it's the same with you, man. Like I've done some composing, probably in the same way that you've done some mixing and your pre-mixing that you were saying before. I've done some stuff like that, and filled in little pieces. But yeah, composing a full film from scratch, and certainly transposing it to notation, that's not in my skill set whatsoever. So I would leave that to a professional like yourself for those things, and I think that's the beauty of it too. That's that collaboration again. But I was going to say as well that just relating to this, sometimes when the wrong creative decision is made, or maybe it's not for a creative reason at all, it's often budgetary, or at the bigger, or Hollywood side of things, it can be on the other side of it, it's not really a budgetary restriction. It's actually they've got so much money they need to make back from investors and things like that. So when that happens, sometimes these creative decisions that are best for the film, are prioritized second to that return of investment, and that's a problem in the industry as well. And I think we've all seen different parts of that.
And sometimes I feel bad for them, like especially when they wanted to create something great, and then a committee comes in that has no passion for the project, and they're going surely on the numbers. What's the biggest demographic that we can get for this? How can we maximize it in all these markets? And then they end up stripping the soul from it, even though the artist wanted to put soul into it.
Yes, exactly right. And that's those decisions I'm talking about, where it's sometimes overlooked, or it has to be a secondary priority for the artist's actual vision to come through, if they need that return of investment. But unfortunately, sometimes that what can happen is what the artist was intending to do or say with their film might get lost because of those creative decisions that have been sacrificed. And that's really the tragedy, I guess. We see that a bit, particularly at the higher levels, or the mid to high levels. That does tend to happen. But there's plenty of ways to elevate the industry here. I think you probably agree.
Absolutely.
one of the biggest ones is, I guess, quality over quantity. Really make sure you're loving what you're doing and creating, and make the films you want to see, not what you think other people might want to watch. Make it for yourself. That's probably the best advice I can think of. But let's move on. It's plug time. So, what are you working on right now? And feel free to just let us know anything you've got going on or any projects. If you're allowed to name drop anything. What have you got going on? What's coming out in the next little bit?
I've been actually kind of in a creative high at the moment because there is a project, a sci-fi film that my friends are making, and they want me to do the music for it. And I just had this. I was driving and I got this idea, so I've been like flushing out all these ideas, and they're still in post production. So we're waiting to get started, but I just I couldn't wait, so I started doing a bunch of work on it.
That's awesome.
And I'm super excited about it. They're like, I sent them some of the stuff I've been working on, and they love it. And so I'm excited to get the ball rolling on actually scoring scenes and getting to recording, because I feel like it could be a really great score, and it could really tell, like, it's like an old school kind of sci-fi, like that kind of classic 1980s, let's go big,
like Alien type thing.
Yeah, like one of their the musical inspiration that they were telling me was the original Star Trek film by Jerry Goldsmith, and like I'm on board like that. Like you don't get those kinds of things very often, so like I'm super excited to get to write in this style. So hopefully we can get that going soon. We're just securing the last bit of budget for the recording, so hopefully we can get that going.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, looking forward to hearing more about that one. Last question before we finish up for today. What was your favorite project that you've worked on so far, and a little bit why?
Oh man, so many for so many different reasons, but I have to say, one of the greatest experiences I had was actually getting to record at Air Studios in London. It was surreal because I'd watched the film King Arthur, that I think 2004 film, and I was watching the special features, and they had a little snippet about the music, and the camera pans down from this beautiful blue ceiling down to the scoring stage, and like there's this beautiful old converted church that they use for recording a bunch of film scores, and little did I know that 13 years later, I was going to be there myself recording music that I've written. That was just amazing to me.
Hell yeah.
And so, that's a real standout moment for me.
I can imagine. That sounds absolutely thrilling. Well, I think we've run out of time now, so we might wrap this up. But thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm sure we'll talk more very soon, and we'll be sure to keep everyone updated on what you got going on.
Yeah, nice.
So we'll also post some links for the binaural video with the Dolby Atmos render for the Sylvan Sprites as well. So you guys can check that out if you want to. And you can find more of Andrew's work as well on all the major streaming sites for music. So make sure you go and support him as well. Thanks for listening, guys. This is Beyond Stereo, the Dolby Atmos podcast. I'm Dan Bucknell, and I'll see you on the next one.